Let's move on. The next presentation is about creating a common approach for responsible AI development and deployment from Cornelia Kutterer, who leads Microsoft's European Rule of Law and Responsible Tech team. Her team focuses on the impact of new technologies and regulatory frameworks that meet the expectations of society. They cover policies such as responsible, ethical, trustworthy AI, digital safety and content regulation, privacy, lawful access, human rights, and competition. Cornelia has long-standing experience in information society and internet policies and speaks regularly at regional and international conferences. Before joining to Microsoft, she headed the legal department at BUC, the European Consumer Organization. She has also gained experience in a top 10 law firm and started her professional career in the European Parliament as a political advisor to MEP. Let's invite, with your virtual applause, Cornelia on our virtual stage. Good morning, good day, good afternoon, Cornelia. Where are you connecting from?
I'm connecting from Brussels. Good morning or good afternoon.
Amazing. So how did your day start? Exciting. Once again, speaking to your AI supportive gadget that helped you to get to your work faster?
A little bit indeed.
Do you acknowledge how many of different solutions that we use every day are basically pure AI?
A lot of the technologies that we are using today are empowered or improved, enhanced by AI machine learning. This is from, how we decide whether we take the train or the car, because which one is quicker, or spell checks in Outlook. Yeah, a lot. More than probably many people think.
Absolutely, absolutely. I would like to double on that. But Cornelia, now we have time for your presentation, and I'd like to announce to everyone that Cornelia will be speaking about creating a common approach for responsible AI development and deployment. Cornelia, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be with you. And of course, I would have loved to travel east and be there in person. But thanks to technology, of course, we can be connected as well virtually. I will talk a little bit about, of course, the developments around how do we frame AI and how do we regulate a technology that brings so much benefits to us, but also concerns to citizens. And so with my biggest thanks to the organizers for inviting me to this important event, I will dive in on the topic and really focus on how Microsoft has been working intensively over the last years on this, and of course this will stay on top of our priorities in the years to come. So I'm extremely delighted to speak about with many experts that lead the work on AI, and your conference here is of course one of the important conferences to have this dialogue together. When it comes to artificial intelligence, either from the perspective of the role of a regulator, the developer, or a deployer, or frankly speaking, citizens or consumers or customers that are using the technology, we all have been assigned a task with great responsibility and importance. So let me one step back and acknowledge again the obvious. You started our discussion like that. AI is an exceedingly complex area of technology impacting really, in the meantime, every aspect of our society. And unfortunately, we're still in the middle of a period of profound disruption brought by us by COVID-19. And with that, of course, it also brought a much more rapid adoption of the technology. It goes without saying that the use has the capacity to generate substantive benefits in numerous domains, such as healthcare, climate, public administration, and really generating promises, opportunities for humanity at large. And when you just think about healthcare, one of probably the most amazing benefits during the healthcare crisis, the COVID crisis, was this rapid development of vaccination. That was also due to the fact that AI could help to bring together a lot of experience and a lot of research in a much quicker and more efficient way. At the same time, as I mentioned before, our enthusiasm for the power and the potential of AI does not blind us. We are aware that the development and the use of the AI systems raise important and complex ethical, legal, political, and economic issues. We should be mindful, therefore, of the risks around privacy, surveillance, bias, or intentional misuse, especially in relation to interference with human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, the core elements upon which our European society are built. The past years has also made clear these risks are real. In France, cameras that spotted people not wearing a face mask were deactivated after CNIL, the French Data Protection Authority, declared them illegal. In the Netherlands, a court ruled against Siri, a system that attempted to automatically spot welfare fraud, calling it disproportionate. And in the UK, the A-level grading debacle led to the government reversing course and a report from the statistics regulator setting out some hard lessons about public confidence in algorithms. All of these very clearly illustrate that trust in technology must be earned every day in the big and small decisions that we take about which systems we build, and in particular, how we deploy them. It's for the simple reason that people will not use the technology that they do not trust, that the hard task of putting AI principles in practice has therefore never felt more urgent. It is for the same reason that we at Microsoft are committed to making tech fit for European values. And our Tech Fit for Europe efforts are an acknowledgement of the particular role that the tech sector needs to play in helping Europe realize its AI and tech-related aspirations. So just to give you a little bit insights about our internal journey towards responsible AI, which began more than 4 years ago by now with our CEO Satya Nadella penning an article in the Slate magazine titled "The Partnership of the Future." This article introduced concepts of transparency, efficiency, but not at the expense of dignity of people, intelligent privacy, and algorithmic accountability, not least also to protect against bias. Shortly after, we formed our AI Ethics and Effects in Engineering and Research Group, which is a research-led group that provides subject matter expertise on the state-of-art and emerging trends with respect to our AI ethical principles of fairness, privacy, security, reliability, robustness, inclusion, accountability, and transparency. Microsoft formed the Office of Responsible AI in early 2019, tasked to set our policy and governance processes across the company. In autumn 2019, we published our first version of the Responsible AI Standard, which is a standard, a policy document that operationalizes these principles before mentioned. And if you like, and for those who have been familiar with the proposed AI Act of the European Commission, you can think of the standard akin to the requirements set out in the AI Act proposal for providers of the AI systems. It is an internal set of rules for how we enact our AI principles, also recognizing that around the world there are currently no specific rules on AI. At the moment, and a year later, we have basically previewing version 2 of the Responsible AI Standard internally that has been now also adopted. Last year, we added our responsible AI strategy and engineering group, which enables our engineering teams to implement responsible AI processes, not only through practices, but also through systems and tools, complementing those practices such as transparency reports or data documentation. We've already made available some of our early work as open source toolkits, for example, FairLearn, Interpret ML, or error analysis, tools that aim at operationalizing transparency and accountability. While the responsible AI standard is foundational to our approach, in this fast-moving and nuanced domain, it is also not impossible to reduce all the complex socio-technical considerations into one exhaustive set of rules. And this is really against this background that Microsoft has responded also to the feedback request from the Commission on its AI Act back in August this year. And I will here now talk a little bit more about our position on the AI Act, and hopefully we can then have a conversation around both the internal work we have been doing as well as what we believe has to be done now on the legislative work. First of all, I want to stress that we commend the Commission for its leadership in developing a regulatory framework for the responsible development and the use of AI technologies. The Commission's proposed regulation for harmonized rules on AI, and in addition, the new coordinated plan on AI, are ambitious and important steps toward making trustworthy AI the norm in Europe and around the world. And it's really a landmark that is very much also looked at from different other parts of the world, being the first comprehensive attempt to regulate the technology. We share Europe's commitment to ensuring that the vast potential of AI can be realized by all in ways that are safe, respectful of human fundamental rights, and that align with European values. We welcome the vision and the direction of the AI Act, in particular that it adopts a risk-based framework focused on a clear list of high-risk uses, as well as certain prohibited uses. More importantly, and something we really believe is important, it also incentivizes the broad adoption of responsible AI governance through codes of conducts. We also believe that there are ways to strengthen the proposal to increase clarity and certainty, improve accountability towards citizens, and spur innovation, in particular for R&D entities, both in research but also in business. We thus offer our recommendations, not because we oppose AI regulation, but to share with the regulators what we have learned from the ways in which our customers are deploying AI, emerging trends in the commercial and research landscape, and the experience of developing our own internal responsible AI program, which I described at a high level to you just now. While we firmly agree that the AI Act should articulate what regulated actors should seek to achieve, we believe it will provide a more effective framework for responsible innovation now and into the future if it is less prescriptive on how they achieve them. With these objectives in mind, let me point to the two most significant areas that will benefit from clarification. First, the regulatory obligations need to reflect the role of different actors in the AI value chain for AI systems. Let me explain why. In our experience, the user, and we prefer to call the user deployer of an AI system, to empower him also from the word that is describing his role in responsible AI, will in many cases play a significant role in the decision how the system is deployed. Why? Because AI models are often made available as general purpose AI services that are put to use in customer-defined applications. Customers often combine multiple AI systems or components. And very often AI services can be customized by customer data and they are dynamic. Last but not least, AI services are becoming more generally capable. In particular, AI systems used to augment services to customers, citizens, or consumers can create risks to fundamental rights that are socio-technical in nature. They concern the capabilities and limitations of the technology, combined with people's expectation of it and the social context of its use. So, while mitigating the socio-technical nature of AI risks requires cooperation between the different entities in the value chain, starting with the design and development, it is the deployer of the AI system that is closest to the socio-technical context. Or in other words, responsible and trustworthy AI governance requires to be deployed from the start in the design and engineering cycle and in the deployment cycle as well. Based on that, the grounding of the AI Act in the legislative framework creates challenges in allocating obligations across the value chain. The well-established framework uses pre-market controls to address the health and safety risks that products can pose. So the AI Act, in other words, equals a manufacturer to the provider of an AI system. This allocation of responsibilities may make sense for product safety risks for physical products. Those risks are relatively consistent across deployment scenarios and seldom change once a product is placed on the market. By contrast, a similar allocation of responsibilities is not well suited to AI systems, given the general purpose nature of many AI models and the significant impact that context of use has on the fundamental rights risks that the AI Act seeks to mitigate. Again, in other words, the exemptions that triggers potentially a shift in responsibility in the AI Act, that it is the substantial decisions users make, seems to us rather the rule. And this is eventually a little bit of a detail to the AI Act, but indeed, the AI Act suggests that the deployer follows the instructions of the AI system provider. And if he doesn't, the obligations will shift. To better secure legal certainty and stability as essential preconditions to innovation, it might thus be advisable to adjust the accountability accordingly across that value chain. And in particular, we believe this is the truth for the high-risk AI systems listed in Annex 3 that usually serve to augment the services that are mentioned therein. Our second recommendation refers to the adjustment of the AI Act's requirements to focus on outcomes and processes. Based on our experience of our own standard we developed, we believe this is particularly critical point. Let me also elaborate on that. We applaud the ambition to establish a single uniform set of requirements that would apply across the board across the broad and varied universe of AI products, services, and deployments, and believe this goal can also be achieved. As currently drafted, however, many of the AI Act's requirements are prescriptive or focused on a specific scenario. As a result, they are likely to be workable in some cases, but might be ineffective in others. Examples are error-free data sets. Establishing appropriate processes to minimize the risk of error in data capture, labeling, and other processing is a critical part of the data gathering and training process. For example, language models have tremendous potential to help solve critical societal challenges in domains such as healthcare, where there are large amounts of unstructured text from which AI systems could help researchers identify patterns, trends, and connections. But data from these domains often reflect people's beliefs, assumptions, attitudes, and values, as well as their ambiguity and uncertainty. Language is also very dynamic and contextual, again, reinforcing the challenge of defining what error-free means. There are also situations where including errors in data sets can be advantageous. In healthcare context, for example, the data set used to train an AI model might include inaccuracies or other errors that cannot be cleaned due to the source, for example, self-reporting of symptoms. But training an AI model on data that includes such inaccuracies might be helpful and even preferable where there is reason to expect that such errors might appear in the input data once the system is put into service, for example, in hospitals. Another example is the attempt to achieve complete and representative data. Assessing how well groups will be subject to an AI systems are represented in training data is critical to building a system that provides a similar quality of service to those groups. However, it is not possible to create a complete data set, even when working to ensure key groups are represented, because there's always more data that can be collected. A more effective approach would be for the AI Act to clearly articulate the outcomes that regulated actors should seek to achieve, together with a list of key processes they must adopt to achieve them. For example, outcomes could be described as a high-risk AI system should provide a similar quality of service for relevant demographic groups impacted by the system. Or high-risk AI systems that allocate resources or opportunities should do so in a manner that minimizes disparities in outcomes for relevant demographic groups impacted by the system. High-risk AI, or yet another example, high-risk AI systems that describe, depict, or otherwise represent people, cultures, or societies should minimize the potential for stereotyping, demeaning, or erasing relevant demographic groups impacted by the system. I hope that demonstrates that in order to create fairness, mitigate bias, and ensure that systems are non-discriminatory, we need to understand how the outcomes that we want to achieve, and then eventually take steps how to achieve that. And again, both in development as well as in deployment side. This would indeed help to ensure that regulated actors identify and mitigate risks in an effective and efficient way across the full range of different AI systems and use cases covered by the AI Act. It also creates space for innovation born out of future technological developments and advances in the practice of responsible AI. And let me just say that the amount of research that has emerged over the last 2 or 3 years in advancing the practices to make AI trustworthy, to achieve ways to make AI transparent and help to be accountable for it, ensuring that AI systems are able to consider fairness and being unbiased. I think that is just amazing. But we also need to know that this is not the end. These research practices will evolve, and we need a system that can take into account new innovative ways to ensure these high-level principles. So with this said, I would like to close, and maybe we have a couple of minutes to have some questions as well. I'd like to close with the acknowledgement that we are aware of the difficult and critical role policymakers and regulators currently have in promoting an ecosystem of trustworthy AI through their actions. It is a topic that we at Microsoft care deeply about, And we also know that we're still in the beginning of these discussions, and we look forward to continuing this exchange of ideas, working together to build a strong practice of responsible AI in service of the future that puts European citizens at the center of AI systems. And that this, I will say, again, thank you very much for listening, and I hope we can continue the discussion for the last 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Cornelia, for expressing such a difficult topic in a rather easy way to understand. Yes, we do have a few questions, and I'd like to start maybe from my own perspective. Recent public scandals with huge tech companies sends a disturbing message to the societies that companies themselves see or don't see any need of self-regulation. And if there are companies that obey according to ethical ways of operating, the competition is unfair. Is legislation and regulatory frameworks the only ways to keep the monster inside, the capitalist monster inside? What would be your opinion on this?
It's a really good question. I do think, I mean, we have started 3 or 4 years ago now to call for regulation, in particular in very high risk scenarios, such as, for example, in the use of facial recognition technology in public spaces. We believe that it helps to have standards that everybody needs to respect. And yes, it is a tool for those who are responsible and try to operationalize these principles to have a level playing field. I think that's a really fair point, and I would agree with that.
Yes, but then the company can easily move their headquarters to some other continent or country that doesn't see any need for that, and they instantly fall out of the regulatory zone, let's put it like this. At this point, is there any way to actually control it? I don't know, just unplug the electricity, disconnect them from the internet? I don't know. Let's just emphasize on this. So like, are there any ways for us to actually sit down and agree on the common rules?
I think that's exactly what the AI Act is doing. I mean, the European Union's regulatory framework has been a powerful influencer, not only within the European Union, but really worldwide. I give you one example, which is GDPR. I think we all are aware that many other countries and regions have followed through adopting similar regulatory frameworks to protect personal data in their countries. And it's, of course, very much related to the fact that there is pressures in order to do business. There is no business that doesn't rely on the data and the transfer of data. Hence, there is a business need for other countries to follow through. Also, from a business insight perspective, frankly, you want to have a fairly homogeneous regulatory environment if you're a global company in order to facilitate your compliance structures. And of course, when you look at the AI Act, similar to the GDPR, it takes the view that if wherever you build your AI systems, if you want to market the AI system or put it in service within the European Union, you will have to comply with those rules as well. So it is a de facto much broader than only impacting European business. And we at Microsoft, we are looking very closely at the AI Act in order to prepare for future compliance, but also to help customers then to be compliant as well in the future.
Thank you for that. But there's one region, let's say I'll mention only 2 countries that combine is more than 2 billion of people that are using the technology, and they're not playing along, and they're playing a much more aggressive let's say, way. So at this point, if for example, they build solutions that are not working according to European laws or, let's say, American laws or regulations, and they become an industry standard. So what will we do then?
So I think the acknowledgement of democratic countries to work together in putting principles is understood, and we are quite enthusiastic that we see a lot of alignment between different democratic states to work on the same values, but also the same standards. This is early stages, but recently with the Transatlantic Technical Council, AI was top of mind, and there is a lot of enthusiasm to work together. But there is also the OECD work, the G7 work, the global AI that has been built amongst those countries, and I think that will help in order to strengthen our democratic values, frankly, and the fundamental rights of the citizens in these regions. So I think there is a counterbalance to that. But of course, again, in principle, a AI Act will also support that values and fundamental rights within the European Union can be upheld, whoever is the provider of the technology.
Thank you for that. And let's speak about the money or the cost connected to these regulations. And I see a question from Audris Valika. He's asking, according to Center for Data Innovation Analysis, proposed Artificial Intelligence Act, if adopted, will be the world's most restrictive regulation of artificial intelligence tools. It will not only limit AI development and use in Europe, but also impose significant costs on EU businesses and consumers. The IAI Act will cost the European economy 31 billion over the next 5 years and reduce AI investment by almost 20%. A European SME that deploys a high-risk AI system will incur compliance costs of up to 400,000 euros, which would cause profits to decline by 40%. Do you agree with that conclusions, and what is your opinion on this? Mm-hmm. That's not an easy one. I feel it. I feel it from your face.
Well, I will say I cannot really comment on the numbers here.
Yeah, but also Professor Jürgen, he also expressed, but he does understand the need for some regulation on some frameworks, but won't we just limit ourselves with these?
Yeah, let me put it eventually this way. When fundamental rights and human rights are at risk, governments have a responsibility to protect them. And it's a positive obligation that comes from our human rights framework and fundamental rights framework we have. There is, in principle, also no difference to make whether you're a big company or a small company. It's a little bit like when you think about health products that, by the way, are very often developed by rather smaller companies, but the legislative framework ensures that there is health and safety risks that need to be addressed no matter how big or small you are. That is the first thing I would say. But this said, compliance costs are always harder to bear for smaller companies. It's a scale, if you like, it's a scaling effort here. So legislators will have to really think hard in order to make the right choices in not making it too cumbersome for really discouraging smaller companies to engage in new innovation. And by the way, I mean actually not only from the AI system provider, innovation also happens on the deployment side, in particular as AI is often general purpose. So we have to think about both here. The Commission in the AI Act is addressing this to a certain extent. I think I think there can more be done. Again, there's eventually a little bit less bureaucratic ways to ensure that risks are mitigated in the development and deployment of the AI system. That I think is a feasible goal in the legislative process. In addition, I think what is also eventually even more important is that research and development is not affected. And I think there's ways to formulate that, in particular in the space of open source innovation. So I think there are ways to ensure that the in particular research is not impacted in a very negative way. There's ways to make the compliance easier for companies that develop AI systems that might be used in high-risk scenarios. And I will say one additional point here, because it's an interest in, we'll have to think a little bit how the impact really will be manifest. There is the obligations only apply to these high-risk scenarios. And if you think about all the manifold uses of AI, it's a fairly limited list of use cases. But in particular, when you have general purpose AI systems that think about text analytics that I can use to screen CVs for recruitment, which is high risk, or I can use it to look at my reviews as a restaurant owner online. But for technology providers, again, the compliance system, you're not thinking of the specific use. You're doing this across the board. So probably the systems that are going to put in place will apply to much more than only these high-risk systems. But on the other hand, someone could say, well, I developed the system, but I will exclude these specific uses. And both might have potential negative impacts. So we need to think a little bit about the different scenarios in how the market would react to the AI Act. And I think the verdict here is still out, but a lot can be done to minimize the concerns that I think are appropriate, that this might be problematic, in particular for smaller, medium-sized enterprises.
Understood. Thank you so much for a pretty honest, but still politically correct answer in this landfill full of mines. You did a great job. Thank you for that. Okay, Cornelia, and just to close up our Q&A, technology has no borders, and obviously we are fighting in a one beautiful, I'd rather to say beautiful world. But what would be your message for the younger generation, the young specialists that are super keen on building something powerful and beautiful? What would be your message for them? Because they will be the ones that will live in the new world.
Oh my God. So
stay
go
bold,
for it.
Stay strong, stay fearful, don't be afraid. We can do it. I'm joking.
No, but look, go for it. I think it's an exciting time to do the right things. And it's eventually important to really think about this. It's not the machine who decides whether the AI systems is deployed for good or not. So I think we all, but in particular the younger generation, have to think about how they want that their world looks like and act accordingly. And this is really where this responsible AI is so much more than the AI Act. It is really, we need to think about why we are building it and for what reason. And sometimes something might not be built because we want to ensure that there is this, it's used to really augment human capabilities and used in a way that does good and is human-centric. So that would be probably my advice.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And thank you for being with us today. Ladies
you
and
so much.
gentlemen, that was Cornelia Kutterer, Senior Director, Rule of Law, Responsible Tech and Competition Affairs at European Microsoft.